Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Vladimír Bilčík, and I'll be leading this panel for the next, we've got about 50 minutes, so we actually have a coffee break coming up, and I'm very happy that most of you have decided to stick with us. I've been thinking about how to pitch this panel, and actually last night I had an unexpected visit to the emergency room with my daughter, and while waiting for a doctor outside the ER, she and I were reading a children's book. It's a classic by Marilyn Sadler called It's Not Easy Being a Bunny. And it's about a bunny who basically is not very happy living a life of a bunny, so he tries out a life with 7 different animals, only to discover that actually it's not so bad being a bunny after all. Well, that's how I feel a bit about this panel. It's not easy discussing the trio, and it's not easy discussing the EU presidency, but I hope we do come away from this panel thinking, well, it need not be so bad. Actually, there is substance, and there is some excitement to this. And so I'm very happy that I not only have you here in the audience, but we have a very distinguished set of panelists here on my right. Let me briefly introduce them to you, and we'll get started with a bit of discussion on the EU presidency and the trio. Let me start from my nearest right. We have Hans Feilbrief. My Dutch is not very good, but I tried to learn that. Yes. Hans is, I should say, somebody who wasn't supposed to sit on the panel, and my pleasure is even bigger that you're here. Unfortunately, and I have to excuse Ambassador Richard van Riesen, who was the original person on the panel. Unfortunately, he fell sick, and I hope we all wish him well soon. So very warm welcome to you. Hans is a Treasurer General at the Ministry of Finance in the Netherlands, and is the principal advisor to the Minister on Euro-related matters. And I promise not to be too tough on him, since he's a last-minute replacement on bigger questions, so I'll try to restrain, I promise. On my further right in the middle, we have Ian Borg, who comes from Malta, is I understand, the youngest member of the executive in Malta, and is also the parliamentary secretary responsible for the preparation of the EU Council presidency, and is also responsible for EU funds. So very warm welcome to you. And last but certainly not least, on the very home turf, we have Ivan Korčok, who is the State Secretary here in Slovakia, and is also the governmental plenipotentiary for the Council presidency of Slovakia in the latter half of next year. Gentlemen, welcome to you, welcome to all of you, and let's kick it off. I hope we can have kind of a snapshot interaction, not quick speeches or long speeches, but rather a discussion. We'll try to lead it here on the panel for the next 25 minutes or so, and then we'll open it up to questions from the audience. My initial question is, and I guess this gets back to my thinking about, how to really pitch this. Why should we care about presidency these days? Why is presidency in the post-Lisbon era still important? Or is it? What would you say to this? And maybe I'll ask here on the spot, Hans from the Netherlands. You've been in the not you personally, but Netherlands in the presidential seat a number of times. Yeah. Is it still important? And actually, does it actually matter in issues related to EMU, Euro? What relevance do you foresee it'll play in a few weeks' time?
Well, it does a lot. I mean, when we were last president in 2004, we tried to push down the Services Directive. We didn't succeed fully, but we made a long way. And now for the next 6 months, we will try to push further the banking union, the capital markets union, which Jeroen Dijsselbloem pointed out, which is very, very important. So, I mean, well, from a national perspective, you could say you cannot push your own agenda. I mean, it's not about pushing a Dutch agenda, but it's pushing Europe forward. So I would say, yes, indeed, it's very important, and it's also very important that we do it, the three of us, and not alone, so that this is sort of a rolling agenda.
And you think the presidency still plays a role to the extent it can push certain things?
Absolutely. My experience is, having been in the Eurogroup presidency, that we really pushed for things like the banking union. I mean, the banking union wouldn't have been there if there would have been a big push by Jeroen Dijsselbloem, but also by the rolling presidencies then, like Lithuania and Latvia, etc.
Mm-hmm.
So yes.
Okay, Malta and Slovakia are newcomers. This is going to be the first time, and the first time is always very important. We want to leave a good impression, but also get the job done and capitalize on it in the wider context. How is the thinking in Malta? Is the presidency still important? You kind of lose the limelight. You don't have the prime minister taking the center stage in Brussels. Nonetheless, there is a lot at hand when we look at the tasks which the EU has to deal with.
I think that every rotating presidency leaves its mark somehow, in some way or another. So, being also post-Lisbon, we have to take into the equation the European Parliament, and therefore also dealing with the other co-legislator, which is a crucial thing, especially if you are going to preside for the first time. And definitely it's also an opportunity for our public administration, which is doing a lot of work at the working group and working party levels. Indeed, the 18-month program is very positive and also functional. We've been working together with Ivan. We had Peter beforehand, and the Netherlands counterparts, and we believe that it's also important now to step up the communications with the local citizens, which sometimes even not just the man on the street, but also people in some key positions are not able to distinguish between the institutions. And therefore, it's crucial for us not to raise too much the expectations. There's the Commission's work program. There are the strategic agenda set by the European Council, and our role is quite functional and an operative one. Of course, we don't have to be that rigid, especially in some instances where we need to react to the changes which are ongoing, like we just experienced in the past months, for instance, when it comes to migration. I'm pretty sure that we'll have opportunity to enter into more details of particular issues which we will definitely having ahead of us in the next 18 months.
Yes. You've opened up a very good wider issue of the importance of the presidency, and that's not only the Brussels dimension, but also the domestic dimension. Let me ask Ivan Korčok. Ivan, you've experienced a number of presidencies as Slovakia's permanent representative in Brussels. What is the big qualitative change in your view, and is the presidency losing its importance post-Lisbon? And what is the Slovakia's, in that sense, expectation? What should it be in terms of the Brussels scene? But also, let me pick up the second question, which Ian has kind of outlined. How can we sell this package, this position, back at home, that is to the Slovak public, which actually has been one of the publics in the EU when we look at the trends, which on a lot of EU-related issues has had a very optimistic or a fairly optimistic outlook. So how to work with this further?
First, back to your original question, which I think was extremely important when you asked whether presidency of the Council still matters. My simple answer is yes, it does. Mm-hmm. It's my own experience because I had a chance to experience 12 presidencies while I was ambassador back in Brussels. But if Hans, representing Netherlands, who has been holding the presidency for 12 times, says it does matter, then it really is something which is extremely important. But I think this is falling out now. Secondly, it does matter for another simple and obvious reason, because is not a presidency of the Union. This is a presidency of the Council, and the Council is one of the three important institutions which are participating in the legislative process, and in no other institution member states can have their share on the legislative process. So I think the presidency provides exactly the instruments how to establish ownership in legislative process. Now, back to your question, Vlad, how can we sell all this back home? I think there are different perspectives. Certainly, it is a different way of communication for Netherlands to sell it back home, because there is, let me put it very bluntly, there is maybe not such high doses of adrenaline and expectations, because it's not for the first time. In Slovakia, I don't know how about you, Jan, in Malta, I'm not facing so far, I would call it a massive interest coming from society or from media when it comes to the upcoming presidency. But for me, the most striking point, how to explain back home what the presidency is all about, is to tell that after 11 years after we joined European Union, for the first time, we will have to get undressed of our national jersey, and for 6 months, Slovak presidency will have to put in forefront not its own national interest, because that's the essence of presidency, but it will have to run on behalf of 28 member states the common European agenda. And I think it is good for this country to really experience a new sense of responsibility, where a permanent representative, Peter Javorčík, with whom we swapped, for 6 months, he can forget the narrative which I have been using for almost 6 years, where each and every intervention of mine has started with Slovakia would like to say. Forget it for 6 months. And I think this is new experience. This is a very good experience. I know if I were a politician, I would not be very popular if I said, which is really the essence of presidency, and that is to serve the rest of 28 member states within the Council, to represent it externally and especially vis-à-vis the rest of the institutions. So it will be very difficult task for us to create a positive narrative about presidency and sell it positively back home.
Okay, we've kind of have a snapshot idea of what the presidency is and also why it matters. Now let's add the other sexy word, and that's the trio to the picture. Why is the trio important? We had trio even back before Lisbon was in place. It started out, so this is not a new thing. But certainly the ambition today of the Netherlands, Malta and Slovakia, also being three countries in Schengen, in Eurozone, is to use the trio and utilize the trio in a slightly different way than thus far. So my question is, and maybe I'll start with Ian here, what, in your view, since you're the last one, not you, but Malta is the last one in the trio, what does this trio exercise mean for you in terms of the preparation for the presidency itself and for this role of taking the European head on and taking off the national head while you're in Brussels, but also in Malta in the early half of 2017?
I think it was a good learning curve in the past year and a half, especially when trio meetings were taking place in our three capitals, and together with the Council Secretariat, we were basically, first of all, we will be in an 18-month period where this legislature will start to reap the fruits of the legislative process, because most of the dossiers will be at a mature stage and hopefully closed off, and therefore this is not we will not face the difficulty, for instance, that our Italian friends had to face, because you had a new parliament, new commission, so on and so forth. So basically this will really engage in the legislative process, and we will be very busy also with some midterm reviews in particular, and therefore we will be inundated with trialogues also later on, and therefore the work we did in the past, where for the first time, it's important to mention, we decided to be in sync with the other institutions and be more focused. those of you in the hall which are used to receive trio programs of the trio presidencies basically know that it's about over 100-page document. It speaks about everything. It speaks about the EMU, but it also speaks about nutrition legislation, about obesity, about sports, about
so are we going to have something different this time?
Yes, we decided as trio partners to focus on the strategic agenda as approved by the European Council back in June 2014. Five issues decided by our leaders, by our head of states, and therefore be more focused. It does not mean that we will not give the due importance to working parties, all the working parties taking place, but we have our focus according to what was agreed at Prime Minister's level, and this gives us the flexibility to work on the completion of the single market, the digital aspect in that regards, migration, the new migration policy, the new packages we will have on the table by the Commission, our neighborhood policy, which should be now revamped because we have to admit that this is not what we desired when the neighborhood policy was enacted back in 2004. Now we have basically a ring of fire starting from Libya, Syria. You can go up to Ukraine rather than having a healthy neighborhood, and therefore this is.
But what can the trio do in the neighborhood policy? I mean, this is external relations, which basically after Lisbon is by and large in the hands of the High Representative. So what is the role of the presidency here?
True, but I think that, as already mentioned also in the previous panels, I think that this commission is also a political one in the sense that, of course, it appreciates that it has to work with the other institutions and understands also what the member states and their respective government intentions are, because this is not a federal union, this is a union of member states. And therefore, I think that the hard work and the very good work being done by the High Rep Mogherini is being much appreciated by the Ministers for Foreign Affairs, and there's a good working relationship at that level. But of course, we have to address this instability. And for instance, for us, it will be an occasion to once again put on the agenda also in the informal aspect of the presidency, that is what we do in our capital, in the non-decision binding meetings, in our case on the Mediterranean region, the southern Mediterranean, because I think also with migration being one of the consequence challenge we all face today, everybody appreciates that peace and stability in the southern neighborhood is not something which only Malta, Italy, or Greece would like to see, but the whole continent, because it's crucial for everyone to have Libya back on its feet, and also try to reach other positive results in the rest of the north of Africa.
Great. I think we kind of got a sense of the Maltese stamp on the trio and maybe some of the key issues you also want to highlight in terms of your communication, which is very important. You mentioned something which is the union is the union of states. But of course, we have the institutions and we also have a various degree of integration of those states. One of the things which, as I did say, binds the three countries is not only a membership in Schengen, but also membership in the Eurozone. Let me ask Hans here, what could this mean for the work program and also actual progress in terms of the trio? I think this is going to be the first trio in a long time where we actually have the three countries inside the club of the common currency. So how can we actually use this? And perhaps we heard your minister a little while ago. Could this be an opportunity for maybe more continuity and some strategy inside the Eurozone?
I think one of the big issues would be the deposit insurance system, which is, of course, 28 wide, but it would be great if the Commission indeed comes with a proposal in this year or next year, and we start talking in the Council about this. It would be very good if the Slovak presidency can take over, and that it could be finished off by the Maltese presidency. I mean, this is an obvious example of a trio which can work together and prepare sort of the end stage, and not starting all over again. So I think this would be a very concrete example of working together, which springs into my mind from my own work.
Okay. Ivan, please.
Well, to the same question, can I be very open and blunt?
Yes.
My concern when it comes to TRIO's role and how to move forward the reform agenda for Eurozone, I'm not concerned really at all about what the presidents, what the three presidencies should be doing. That would be too easy. My problem is that there is a lacking readiness to really make decisive steps forward. Secondly, those decisive steps forward, which are indicated in the 5 Presidents report, where one of the co-authors was President Dijsselbloem, are absolutely needed. But there is no debate on highest political level how to make those bold steps. Can I say very bluntly that during the Eurozone crisis, major revolutionary steps forward to stabilize Eurozone and create systemic instruments were done once we were driven by markets and by market pressure and by the crisis as such. Let us not be misled by the fact that we were given by the markets in the Eurozone, more or less, if we take out Greece and recent experience with them. Let us not be misled. We were rather given a timeout by the markets when it comes to whole stability of Eurozone. But there is the same need to make bold steps as we have seen under the peak of the crisis. And the problem, Hans, is not the 5 Presidents' report. The problem is not what the trio will do. The problem is that there is no debate on the highest political level. How are we going to agree on most important steps that are needed to stabilize in a long-term perspective? So, we have had 2010, help me if I'm correct or not, we had equally a report presented by President Van Rompuy, which was equally good. Now we have repacked it. Now it has a name of 5 Presidents' report. But I'm asking, where is the leadership to move the things forward? I'd be absolutely delighted, Hans and Jan, if we could cooperate in concrete legislative steps that will move ahead. But I dare say here, nothing will move unless we are given a clear political guidance to go in that direction, of which we know will not be possible unless we share more sovereignty between member states and common institutions. So my problem, complacency in this area, and a bit lacking leadership.
So maybe,
May I can say
yes,
something
please.
that is because I think that Julian Dijsselbloem just tried to outline that one of the first preconditions for all this to make giant steps forward, which are necessary, is that we need our peoples in. I mean, we cannot go on technocratically pushing out the Union and the Eurozone and not involve our populations. So, I mean, this plea for leadership is all fine, and I like it, and I think it's necessary. But leadership now involves involving people. It doesn't mean that you sort of preach from the council and tell people this is the way we should go forward. So that would be my first answer to Ivan. I fully agree with the goal, but I think that is the kind of leadership we would need. And the second thing is, to be honest, my own experience in the banking union has been, Ivan, that you may have very sort of big concepts, but the reality on the ground is that you have to work very, very hard. I mean, I've spent 20 hours in a row in European Parliament on the SRM, on making the resolution mechanism, 20 hours of negotiations. So that's the kind of work you need to do when being a president. I think we're able and willing to do that. You're able to, the Maltese are able to, and I think that's sort of the value of the trio. But you're absolutely right. I mean, you need a perspective. But the kind of leadership we need, I'm totally convinced of that it should be, well, I don't want to be very popular, but it should be inclusive leadership. So it should be leadership which is based on what people want. In my own country, the skepticism about Europe is very high. I think it's here the same. So we need to involve our people who want to go forward, otherwise it won't work.
Okay, I think the sense I'm getting out of this is that in terms of politics and political issues, certainly this is not going to be, and in some respects hasn't been, business as usual for some time. And that's, of course, perhaps a real qualitative change also in terms of what the presidency and the trio can achieve. We have a little over 20 minutes to go, and I'd like to open it up because we touched the political issue and the people, to the people and the audience here. Let's try to take maybe 1 or 2 or 3 questions a series, and if you can be as specific and direct a question to a specific person, that's great. If you have a comment, please try to be fairly brief and also targeted. Who is going to pick it up? It's always hard to break the ice. Nobody.
We solved it.
All right.
I think.
I'm not sure what this tells me about my bunny question initially.
No, there's somebody
here. There is somebody here. Okay. The mic is coming, please.
Thank you, Ivan, to you. So I understood you told us you want to work together, yeah, and that this is needed, and that there are some programs which are ongoing. What I still don't get is what is special in the presidency and why we need you three to work together. What do you actually change?
Well, I can. What was it to me? I mean,
because I know you.
Yes.
Others can pick it up too.
You know me. Can I say what he is? He's a good friend and chairman of Východoslovenská elektrárne, Tomáš Hejtman. No, look, why this is needed, that we three of us, not only that we are sitting here by coincidence, but that there is this idea of trio, Tomáš. It is very simple, you know. One of the tasks for presidency is to run the legislative process. And everybody knows to conclude from legislative proposal to legislation that takes a lot of time in European Union. So therefore you need to establish certain continuity over time which is longer than 6 months, because if any presidency within 6 months would start to follow its own path, you would get nowhere, basically. So the first fundamental intention is to extend continuity, in this case for 18 months. Of course, you could ask, why couldn't we have presidency for 12 months? But then each and every member state would come, the turn for any member state would come once in 24 years. How can we once in 24 years then talk about ownership that a country wants to establish in the legislative process? So this continuity issue for me is extremely important. Then there are other issues, how to establish continuity, certain continuity between the two following trios, because that also makes sense. So I think we in Slovakia, we are already talking also with the following presidency coming after Slovakia, Malta, and Netherlands. But this is it. But a lot, I think, will depend on how our Dutch friends will kick off, pragmatically, because for them, I hope the trio is not ending at the moment when they are starting their national presidency, which is January 1st. And I know realistically what will be in the forefront of your efforts is your own national Dutch presidency. But may I invite you to look a little bit beyond the horizon of your 6 months and stick to what we have, I think, successfully started, to identify the areas where we could get three of us a bit more, as if we went just individually for 6 months targets, if you want.
Mm-hmm. We have more questions. Josef?
We can
Up front, please. Yeah, here.
You got two now.
All right. Josef Bátora, Comenius University, Department of Political Science. Now, obviously, the idea of the three presidencies working together is indeed a good one, because one presidency in 6 months cannot achieve much. Coordination is really important over a longer period of time. The question, of course, is these three countries are Eurozone member countries, and the kind of debate we're having about the developments in the EU right now is how do we keep all this together? Now, the kinds of proposals that are on the table within the Eurozone about the deepening of integration in the Eurozone, that's all fine, but we also need to make sure that these presidencies keep the EU together as a positive project. So how do you guys think about the involvement of non-Eurozone countries in the development of the institutional infrastructure of the Eurozone? Okay.
Hans, please.
Yeah, I think what's in the forefront, it's a very good question, because what's in the forefront of our minds is, of course, that we face a certain country which will have a referendum on being in the Union or not. So that's very important for us. So we will, having the Eurozone presidency and the ECOFIN presidency, we will do our utmost just to let the integration of the Eurozone go along with trying to involve the outs. And that's, of course, a big issue for us, and I think it's shared by my colleagues on the stage here, that we want to work on this, and we will work very concretely on this. So we will try to involve the outs as much as possible in the Eurozone discussion. Actually, when we're talking, Ivan knows, he's been there, when we're talking about the 5 Presidents report, we're not talking about this in the Eurogroup. We're doing this in ECOFIN.
Right.
So this is sort of a sign that it's also important for them.
Joseph actually raised the issue of a possible Brexit, and we'll have the UK Minister for Europe speaking after coffee break. So I'm very grateful, but I think this is a very pertinent question. How do we keep it all together? And the relationship between the ins and outs is one of the key ones. Ivan, you wanted to react quickly?
Yes, from our own national perspective, I think it is key to really undertake and try everything to avoid a divide between the ins and the outists, because I learned in England 2 weeks ago that the camp of those who are advocating outs, they used to refer to them as to outists. So between ins and outs, why is it Slovak interest? Let me say it very bluntly too, having Czech friends in the audience. The Slovak interest is to have Visegrad as soon as we can in the Eurozone. Mm-hmm. This is Slovak interest. Why shouldn't I say that? In order to get it, in Slovakia, we have to really do everything what we can that the rest, I mean, in Visegrad, which is not in, will not get a feeling that they're subject of our decisions that we take within the Eurozone, but heavily impact on them. Because no doubt what we are doing while deepening, Eurozone, while banking union, it does have impact on internal market. And therefore, I totally understand British friends when they say we have to resolve this, because they are proponents of a very strong internal market, but in no way it must happen that this is to the detriment of those who are not there. At the same time, Hans, may I say, they must not have a veto over what is needed to be done on the level of Eurozone to make it more stable. So we have to find a solution which, that's my point, is extremely important for Slovakia. And if we can do something as a trio for that, to establish a reassurance for those who are not yet there, that they should not be afraid of what we are doing, that will not be to the detriment of their interests, I think it would be excellent achievement.
Of course, that's one view how to approach the issue, and fairly positive and optimistic. We all know at the same time Eurozone enlargement is not in the cards anytime soon. And of course, the debate is rather driven by other issues, such as how to keep the separation firmer without imposing costs on those who are out. That's certainly the British line. Ian, what's the debate like in Malta on this? Of course, Malta is a bit of a different story because you had a much bigger internal debate on the very membership in the European Union before you joined, but you did join the Euro even before we did. So what's the view on Malta, if I can put it a bit more specifically on the whole Brexit issue?
Yes, and even though membership was heatedly debated, Malta now has the highest turnout when it comes to the EU European parliamentary elections, and therefore,
unlike Slovakia, we are the last ones.
And therefore now the Maltese population is convinced that we should do our utmost in the EU, and therefore that's not an issue any longer. Actually, political parties are competing who can be the best to govern an EU member state, that is Malta. And when it comes to Brexit, of course, last year we celebrated our 50th anniversary together with the UK since our independence. And whilst Europe is important for the UK, I think we have to admit that also the UK is important for the European project, and therefore, whilst we would like to see this issue resolved positively by the UK population, of course, we should not rush into starting to mention things like treaty changes, so on and so forth, because I think that this can even scare even further our citizens. I mean, I've been impressed in the past year and a half speaking to the Dutch colleagues about skepticism in a founding member state. But look at the Netherlands. They are approaching it in a more pragmatic way, like involving, proposing to involve more the national parliaments when it comes to legislation, and therefore deciding what can be decided at national level, and then of course discuss shared competences at EU level. And I'm pretty sure that if we communicate all together the importance of this European project, it is still very relevant in 2015, and definitely whilst not at any cost, but we all do hope that the UK will remain, of course, part of this union.
We all hope, but I guess we also have to get ready for the unexpected, and maybe that's also one of the tasks of the trio. We can get to that, but this issue is finally catching some attention. We have several hands up. Let's take the gentleman in the back and then Mr. Taylor here. Let's take two questions. Please, yes.
Charles Tannock, and I particularly wanted to direct my question at the Maltese representative, because one of the big nebulous myths being spun by those who wish for the United Kingdom to leave the European Union is this concept of the Anglosphere, which is basically the Commonwealth and the United States. And Malta is unique in the European Union, along with Cyprus, as being Commonwealth countries as well as EU member states. And it could be, possibly, that during the Slovak presidency we'll be right in the middle of the Brexit campaign. And my challenge to Mr. Muscat, who was an MEP colleague, by the way, another example of an MEP who's now Prime Minister, is to simply say, will the leadership of your country, who, as was said before, went through a Eurosceptic split between the Labour and the more Conservatives, come out firmly in saying it's in Maltese and Commonwealth interests for Britain to stay in the European Union, and that this kind of Anglosphere concept is really just a complete myth. There's no such thing, and that really Malta, and you do have quite a large diaspora community in the United Kingdom who will be entitled to vote on Brexit, unlike Slovaks and Poles and others. Your people, your citizens living in the United Kingdom will be able to vote. So my appeal to all Commonwealth leaders right now is to rubbish this whole Anglosphere concept, because you know better than most.
Thank you. This is really getting us on that tricky line in terms of management, the EU business and the national questions. But those are real things, so I'll get it back to you. But let me take the question here, and then we'll kick it back to the panel.
Following on, amen to rubbishing the Anglosphere. But following on perhaps from your earlier discussion, do you think it would do any harm if the United Kingdom wanted it to recognize the European Union formally as a multi-currency union? because some people think it's just a form of words and it's a recognition of reality, since there are 2 member states at least that have permanent derogations from the euro. Others fear that it might encourage some of your neighbours, I think of Poland in particular, to want to unwind its treaty commitment to join the euro. Thank you.
Great. This is a very pertinent question also to the presidency, because we get to the nitty-gritty of wording and negotiations. Do we have any more questions at this point? Yes, please. Let's take another one and then we'll get it back to the panelists. The lady at the front, please. Microphone.
Thank you. My question is about factor of unexpected, because in every presidency there is a crisis, bigger or a smaller one, that causes, let's say, a shift of the agenda of the presidency, and that could lead for some issues in the agenda having to be tackled by the next presidency and the one to follow. So coordination is needed, as you said. But how can you, let's say, prepare for this short crisis? And my second question is to Mr. Korčok. We have a special case with Slovakia having national elections just before you assume your presidency. And people sometimes make the difference. And is that an additional fact that you have to coordinate in the domestic scene with other parties before the election so that you can have a successful outcome of the election? Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent questions, both related to presidency and the domestic context. Let's start with Hans, if I may say so, and try to tackle 2 issues maybe. One is the multi-currency union, and the second one is how do you get ready for the unexpected, which of course the Dutch have had some experience with.
Yep. On the multi-currency, you know, I'm from a very pragmatic country, so we would handle this pragmatically, I guess. I'm not going to negotiate about this on the stage. On the unexpected, how do you prepare for the unexpected? Well, you don't, huh? I mean, you cannot prepare for the unexpected. But the only thing I can say about this is that, indeed, the fact that you're trying to work together with your colleagues in the coming 1.5 years does help. And it does help in our case, to be very honest and very blunt, that we also have the Eurozone presidency. So we do have some ways of dealing with this. But I mean, if you look at, for example, the migrant crisis, well, I don't think the Luxembourg presidency actually prepared for that. And if we would get, to go back to the other 2 gentlemen, if we would get a serious discussion about Great Britain, the UK, I should say, to be honest, this would not be unexpected. We're of course preparing for that. We're thinking about all these questions. So I think this would be the answer to this.
Ian, Malta, Commonwealth, multi-currency.
Yeah. So basically, it's interesting the change we witnessed in the last 12 years. 12 years ago, I was not even entitled to vote in the referendum because I was 17, and our party fought the last general election 2.5 years ago, in pledging that we would like to see Malta one of the best, if not the best, in Europe. And I think our numbers are very positive, one of the biggest economic growth in real terms when it comes to the economy, the highest rate ever of employment, lowest employment rate in history, and so on and so forth. And therefore, we are an example of a positive story among the other member states which joined the EU back in 2004. And I am pretty sure that the UK citizens are smart enough to appreciate this and will intelligently vote to remain in the EU. Of course, all member states will have the opportunity to engage into the discussion once in the coming weeks. The Prime Minister Cameron will send his letters and of course know what sort of reforms he would like to see. And I am pretty sure that with the flexibility allowed within the existing treaties, you can achieve the positive outcome of the said referendum, which in reality the UK citizens already voted in favor of having this referendum when they re-elected Prime Minister Cameron, and therefore I'm optimistic that they are smart enough. They don't need the Maltese or any other member state telling them what to do. But of course, I believe that all the 27 member states will do their part to keep this union together, including and with the UK.
Great, 27 plus 1, 28, yes. Let's hope it stays that way. The timing will be interesting, of course, in terms of managerial tasks, also for the trio on the presidency. Ivan, please, there was a question on Slovak elections, but also other issues, multi-currency union, the unexpected, and I guess the Brexit issue.
Yeah. Whether it could cause any harm if European Union would admit that it was a multi-currency union. Once I know exactly what the British expectation is about what should be in the package, which will be then put forward for your citizens to say either you stay or you go, I can say more on that. Multi-currency union is reality. That's the fact. If you tell me that this would be enough for you to say yes, then I'm saying immediately. But first, we have to wait until next week when we know more. What will be in the letter that Prime Minister Cameron is about to write and tell us. And that's not the diplomatic circumvention. How I want to escape your question, but. We have to see it a bit more in a more complex way. And do you know why? Because we do have our red lines when it comes to the possibilities to meet British requests. So we have to negotiate this. Secondly, whether we can be prepared for unexpected, clearly no. How can you be prepared for unexpected? But we have to be ready, of course. And frankly, I would be happy if something, a sort of crisis would come into Slovak presidency. I wish it was not of external nature, because if it's of external nature, then it is not the presidency. It's rather for European Council and Madam Mogherini, so some other sort of crisis could come up on Slovak table, because many presidencies have been growing with this responsibility to deal and tackle the crisis. Look, Latvians, when they were preparing and drawing a fantastic, sophisticated plans about their presidency, they had no idea whatsoever how successful they will be in getting an agreement on the first pillar of banking union. Mm-hmm. So fantastic. I wish we Slovaks were too given this type of challenge to be once again not prepared, but we will be ready. I can assure you. So I approach this in a relaxed way. And our elections next spring, there are tweets, meaning that this is going public then. I have to be a little bit careful. I almost said, that accidents,
there is a recording,
accidents in democracies happen regularly, and elections are part of it. But we will not be the first country where elections will take place ahead of presidency. Recall we had Polish regular elections, parliamentary elections under their presidency. Regular? No? And it worked. Our Czech friends, many say they started delivering once their government collapsed during presidency. So we will be prepared. Nevertheless, it is extremely difficult when it comes to the short window which will be at the disposal of a new government to prepare for the respective dossiers, because I'm telling, based on my experience in Brussels, of course it depends from the council formation to the other council formation. But ECOFIN, for example, Hans, I think this is almost a full-time full-time job for president of ECOFIN. So the 3 months that will be between our elections and July the 1st, when we take over, we will have to use this time to really prepare our ministers, because this is about political level. I hope it will not be, the working level will not be touched. I'm saying that very, very openly, and I'm sure we will manage that, because we are investing a lot of time already now.
Thank you very much. I guess just to pick up on your last words, accidents happen in politics, but also what's been clear from the panel is that as we progressed, politics more and more is what also helps to drive the presidency, both within the member states, but also in Brussels. So our time for the panel is up, but it's not over for the event. Let me invite you to the coffee break for 15 minutes. Come back to listen to David Lidington. But before we do disperse, please do help me in thanking the panelists, and see you soon.